October is finally coming to an end, and this frightful day will leave you chilled. You clicked on this video with time to spend while I transform this forest into a build. I hope that you guys enjoyed that amazing little limerick of mine that definitely did not take me 20 minutes to come up with, because honestly that's the only cringy rhyming you're ever going to hear from me ever again. My name is Oskip, and today I'm going to transform this giant spruce taiga biome that I'm in and make it even spookier than it already is with a Dracula themed castle. So of course I had to throw something together for Halloween and make it spooky themed as well. And I start the same way I always do with all of my builds. I completely destroy the surrounding area for terraforming. Once I cleared out an area of the forest, I started building up this large cliff face section in the middle that would hold the castle, as that's the main feature of the build. I will admit I went a little large with the base at first, but I'll come back to it later and make some adjustments to fix this. I wanted to dig out the entire 360 degrees around the island to make it into a little lake, as I only really wanted this build to be accessible by crossing the water. Once I'd neatened up the place a little bit, I replaced the sand with stone and began making things look more natural by blending the grass back in, with a little scattering of sand along the shore. So, it was time to begin planning out the buildings for the castle using different coloured walls as a guideline. This definitely helps break things down into sections when working on a complex building such as this one, especially as I was taking inspiration from multiple different images of Dracula and Frankenstein's castle, as I wanted to kind of mash the two together. I then started with the first section of the building, which was this rectangular piece on the side. This was where I initially built a simple design to match the references I had, and then I took measures into my own hands to make the walls look a little bit more interesting. Previously there was just a lot of cobblestone, but I wanted to include some logs into the design to break up the colour a little bit. I worked on this interesting peaked roof and ended up raising it up by several blocks higher. I wanted the castle to look very menacing, and these extremely tall roofs always seem to do that for a build. Once done, I make the first wall section of the middle building, adding in some crenellations and whatnot before moving on to the main large tower. Working in sections like this is really similar to putting together a puzzle, except each building is its own puzzle piece, and sometimes you gotta shove in a piece, and even if that doesn't quite properly fit, you just see if you can get away with it, you know? So, because I'm lazy, I copy and paste the section of the tower up to the next level. But once I placed it in, I decided I couldn't just get away with that, so I went in and adapted the design here and there before moving on to the next tier. Now this was the final tier of the building, and I wanted to add these gothic mini towers along the crenellations, similar to the design that I used for my cathedral build. Finally, I finished it off with a large peaked roof, and then lastly, began creating this outcropping section of the building from the main block of the castle. I kept to a similar wall design throughout this entire build with some adjustments here and there. I was able to add in this big stained glass window before finishing things up by connecting the roof up with the rest of the castle. Now, thanks to my magic abilities, and welded it, I will mirror this middle section of the building to the other side. I know, I'm a real magician, guys. Honestly, I impress myself sometimes. Anyway, it's time to work on the tower at the back of the building. I really wanted to make this design quite unique, so it goes through a few different shapes throughout this one. We start building up the square base of the tower, basically making a miniature version of the large tower and topping it off with some crenellations. This is where things start to turn a little cylindrical as I bring the corners of the tower inwards, and even more so for the next tier of the tower, with the top section protruding out slightly. I went for this really interesting, almost round roof atop the tower, which slightly peaks into a small outlooking area which has its own little roof as well, and honestly, I think it looks pretty cool and very different from what I usually do as well. Back in the cross section of the middle building, it's time to make one last tower. Although it's the shortest of them all, it still includes the same style of walls, crenellations and roof to that of the larger tower next to it. I even managed to include those mini towers along the top. Finally, onto the last section of the building. This included a large spruce door, as this was the main entrance to the castle. I included the same peaked roof and wall designs, and then decided to copy it to the back side of the castle to act as a back door that would lead into the graveyard. But now comes a time where I realised I'd made the island way too large, and I decided to chop away at it. I also had some plans for the entrance, so I raised the ground near there as I started by bridging across the gap to connect to the entrance of the castle. Once I'd arched across the gap, I continued the pathway all the way down the sloped terrain, attempting to make one of those crazy long, wonky walkways that almost follow the shape of the terrain. I'll be honest, this took longer than it probably should have, as it was kind of tricky to get right at first, but eventually I got down to the bottom, where I brought the staircase down to the water level and made the small dock at the bottom, as this was going to be the only way to access the island and castle. Lastly, I bring down the base of the castle and embed it into the rocks of the island to make it look more grounded. I staggered these base walls down slightly, and then I did a little bit more terraforming using some sand to make things look more natural. To match the surrounding taiga biome, I scattered the same grass, podzol and coarse dirt around the island and then began working my way up to the back side of the castle. I created that back door earlier which would lead into the graveyard, so I began by surrounding the area in iron bars. This section of the build wouldn't have been possible without the texture pack that I'm using made by Ewan. He previously made the PewDiePie pack and put together this October themed pack which includes gravestones, cages, candles, coffins, ghosts and just so much more. I'll leave a link to his pack down below so you can check it out for yourselves. Once I'd made a pathway that creeps around the graveyard, I came to the end to make a dead tree with what limited size I'd allowed myself. In the end, I think it turned out looking okay. To finish up, I added a bunch of bats and crows to the graveyard and lit up the interior of the castle. Right, so finally I had to finish things off by sprucing up the forest with some custom trees. I swear to God that joke will never get old. I built up the spine of the trees and then used World Edit to make discs of leaves and air, and gradually decreased and scattered them up the log. Once both trees were done, I scattered them around the edge of the lake and made sure to include a couple varying in size and shape on the island itself near the base. Lastly, as I changed the time of day to night and play around with some lightning commands, the build was finished. Now, all that's left is to play that spooky cinematic. Right, so I hope that you guys enjoyed this spooky build, and if you did, then please let me know so by liking the video. Absolutely smash it. If you're new around here and you like what you see, then why not consider subscribing? Maybe? It could be a laugh, but who knows? But seriously, subscribe right now for the love of... If you like this build, then check out my Patreon where you can download it. I'll leave a link to that down in the description and on the end screen of this video. Also, if you are going to check it out, then remember to use the texture pack link down below if you want to get what it looks like in the video. Anyway, I hope that you all have a very spooky day, and I'll see you next time.